Anthony Davis, but he was the second best player on the championship team. When Luka wins the championship, by the way, he just led them to the finals last year. It's been all NBA 5 times. He's going to be the best player on the championship team. So to me, it seems like they didn't want to pay Luka.
I'm going to go with an easy one for me.
Yeah.
And this, hopefully this is non-controversial, but he was my teammate, and he's also one of the best players in the world. And to coach in the NBA, you need one of the best players in the world. It's Luka.
Just the excitement of being able to add a caliber player like that, a generational talent like that to our franchise, is something that's given me energy.
The NBA has seen its fair share of shocking trades, franchise-altering moves that shake the foundation of the league. But this was different. When Luka Doncic was traded from the Dallas Mavericks to the Los Angeles Lakers, it didn't just stun the basketball world, it rewrote the script on what we thought was possible. One of the most skilled, decorated, and beloved young stars in the game sent packing in a move that still doesn't make sense to most. Weeks have passed, but the shock hasn't fully worn off. If anything, it's only fueled more debate. At first, the conversation revolved around why Dallas would make such a drastic decision. Was it internal friction? A disagreement over Luka's role? Or was it something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface? Conspiracy theories ran wild. Was this really about basketball? Or was it about business, power, and control? But as time passed, the conversation shifted. Now, it's not just about why Luka was traded, it's about how he was treated. The Mavericks front office didn't just move on from their franchise player. They seemingly went out of their way to justify it. In the weeks following the trade, reports surfaced about Luka's conditioning, his leadership, his attitude, as if the Mavericks were trying to convince the world that trading away a generational talent was somehow the right move. That didn't sit well with a lot of people. Former players, NBA legends, and even Luka's former teammates have come to his defense, pushing back against the criticism and calling out the Mavericks for how they handled the situation. The narrative is no longer about Luka being a problem. It's about how Dallas let go of a superstar and tried to rewrite history in the process. Today, we're diving into the biggest reactions from the players, analysts, and insiders who are standing up for Luka. From fiery call-outs to blunt reality checks, the NBA world isn't just watching this trade unfold. They're making sure Luka's name doesn't get dragged through the mud. Because love him or hate him, you can't deny greatness. If there's one thing about Matt Barnes, it's that he's never been one to hold back. A tough, no-nonsense competitor in his playing days, Barnes has carried that same energy into his media career. And when it came to Luka Doncic's trade, he had plenty to say. Barnes didn't just criticize the Mavericks front office, he went straight for the top. In a fiery podcast episode, he unleashed one of the most brutal call-outs of any NBA owner in recent memory.
Mr. DeMont, take a step back, take a seat. You know nothing about hard work or what it takes to be great. You married into money. Sit with this trade that you made. Hopefully Anthony Davis gets healthy, and I wish Dallas Mavericks the best moving forward. But shut the up, man. We all know how good Luka is. We don't give a what you have to say. Just sit back and be an owner.
Barnes didn't just question the decision-making of Dallas's ownership. He flat-out discredited them. He painted a picture of a clueless billionaire who inherited power without understanding what it actually takes to build a championship team. And let's be real, he's not alone in that sentiment. From the moment Luka was traded, fans, players, and analysts have been scratching their heads, trying to figure out how the Mavericks could justify moving on from a generational superstar at 25 years old. But instead of taking accountability, the organization seemed more focused on spinning the narrative, throwing out whispers about Luka's conditioning and leadership, like they needed to defend their decision. That's exactly the kind of thing that pisses off former players like Barnes. Because if there's one thing NBA vets hate, it's when front offices disrespect the greats. Luka didn't deserve to be traded. But even more than that, he didn't deserve to have his name dragged through the mud after it happened. And if the Mavericks thought they could just spin their way out of criticism, well, Matt Barnes just made sure that wasn't going to happen. When a trade this shocking goes down, there are usually two possible explanations: basketball reasons or something deeper. For Paul Pierce, this wasn't just a basketball move. This was ego at play. In a recent podcast episode, the Celtics legend didn't hold back on his disbelief, calling out the Mavericks front office for turning their backs on their entire future.
Man, it's just like, it's some egos that got involved in all of this. Like, you traded the whole future, the whole face, the whole city was on his back and you just said, we don't need you. Like, seriously? This is one of the most unprecedented things I've ever seen. Like, where do they go if they don't make the playoffs? Because they made this trade thinking like right now.
Pierce is asking the real questions here. The Mavericks bet their entire franchise on this trade working out immediately. There was no backup plan, no rebuilding process, just an all-in move that now has zero guarantees. But why? That's where Pierce's theory gets interesting. He believes that this wasn't just about basketball, it was about control. Someone in the Mavericks front office, or maybe even ownership, wanted to prove a point. Was Luka getting too much influence? Was there tension behind the scenes? Did the Mavericks just want to show they were in charge? Because let's be real, you don't trade away a player like Luka Doncic unless there's more going on behind the scenes. And now, if the Mavericks don't make the playoffs, this goes from questionable to catastrophic. And speaking of catastrophic decisions, Jalen Rose had something to say about the financial side of all this. Jalen Rose has seen a lot of bad trades in his time, but when he looked at this one, he saw something even worse, a franchise that wasn't willing to commit to greatness. In a televised discussion, Rose didn't hold back.
To me, it seems like they didn't want to pay Luka. So for me, if you don't want to pay Luka, then just sell the team. That's how I feel about it. Because if you ain't gonna pay somebody to accomplish what he's accomplished already, I don't know where the money gonna come from somebody else.
Rose didn't just call out the trade itself. He questioned the entire direction of the Mavericks as a franchise. Because let's be honest, if you're not willing to pay for a once-in-a-generation player like Luka, what's the plan? This isn't some borderline all-star. This isn't a guy you have concerns about developing. This is Luka Doncic, one of the most dominant young players we've seen in decades. And yet, instead of building around him and securing their future, the Mavericks let him walk. And for what? To save money? To avoid a supermax contract? That's not just a bad move, that's a franchise failure. Because now, Dallas isn't just trying to replace Luka's production. They're trying to justify to their fans why they wouldn't pay to keep one of the most valuable players in the league. And as Rose made very clear, if you're not willing to invest in a player like Luka, then maybe you shouldn't own a team in the first place. When you've been around the NBA as long as Avery Johnson, you've seen your fair share of trades, some brilliant, some questionable, and some that make absolutely no sense at all. For Johnson, Luka Doncic's trade falls firmly in that last category. The former NBA champion, coach, and analyst took to social media to express his disbelief, struggling to wrap his head around how the Mavericks could justify letting go of a player like Luka.
No way, no way, no way. Now, Luka's 25 years old. And sure, there's been some situations defensively where he can improve, obviously the communication onslaught with the referees, but this type of talent doesn't come around that many times in a lifetime.
That last part, that's the key. This type of talent doesn't come around that many times in a lifetime. Johnson's reaction hits at the core of the debate. Luka isn't just an all-star, he's not just a superstar. He's a once-in-a-generation player, the kind of talent you build a franchise around for 15 years, not trade away at 25. Yes, Luka has his flaws. His defense isn't elite. His relationship with referees could improve. But if those are the reasons you're moving on from a player of this caliber, then maybe the problem isn't Luka. Maybe it's you. Because what happens if Luka elevates even further in Los Angeles? What if he takes his game to an MVP level? What if the Mavericks just handed away their best shot at a championship because they were too focused on his weaknesses instead of his greatness? Avery Johnson knows what it takes to win at the highest level. And from his perspective, Dallas just made one of the biggest mistakes in NBA history. But while Johnson focused on the basketball side of things, another former Mavericks insider took aim at something deeper, the people making the decisions. If anyone understands the inner workings of the Mavericks organization, it's Bob Voulgaris. A former Mavs executive, sports bettor, and analytics guru, Voulgaris spent years working behind the scenes, seeing firsthand how the franchise operated. And when the criticism of Luka started ramping up after the trade, he wasn't having it. In a scathing podcast episode, he called out everyone trying to discredit Luka's legacy.
The people who are critiquing him had no business. I'm sorry, but those people have not accomplished anything. They're not accomplished individuals. Who are they to be talking about what it takes to win? That's the part that I found really, really offensive. What have you done in your life that allows you to, yeah, okay, you're in charge of the team, and so you're beholden to that. But like, also, come on, give me a break. What have you inherited a pretty good roster. You inherited a generational superstar. Have a little bit more humility.
This wasn't just defense of Luka. This was a direct attack on the Mavericks front office. Bob is essentially calling out the decision makers for pretending like they were responsible for Luka's success when, in reality, they were lucky enough to have him fall into their laps. And he has a point. Luka wasn't drafted first overall. The Mavericks didn't develop him into an elite player. From the moment he stepped into the NBA, he was him. Yet now, after trading him away, these same executives are trying to control the narrative, acting like Luka wasn't good enough or didn't fit their vision. And to Bob, that's not just wrong, it's downright offensive. Because if you inherit a future Hall of Famer and somehow fail to build a contender around him, maybe it's time to stop blaming the player and start blaming yourself. If there's one person in the NBA world who isn't afraid to speak his mind, it's Shaquille O'Neal. The four-time champion, Hall of Famer, and larger-than-life personality has seen it all. Bad trades, front office disasters, and organizations fumbling generational talents. And when he saw Luka Doncic get traded, Shaq wasn't buying it. In a recent interview, he put the Mavericks front office on blast, demanding real answers for a move that still doesn't make sense.
And the treachery of the business of basketball, which people just come out and say. Like, I want Nico to say, this is why we trade him. Like, nobody's really giving an answer. Like, we want to know. Dirk wants to know. Mark Cuban wants to know. All of Dallas wants to know why you trade one of the best players in the league. Just say.
And that's the problem. Nobody really knows why this happened. The Mavericks haven't given a clear, honest reason for shipping off one of the most dominant young stars in NBA history. Instead, they've dodged questions, thrown out vague statements, and let rumors circulate. Rumors that Shaq and just about everyone else isn't buying. Because let's be real, if Dallas had a good reason, wouldn't they have said it by now? Shaq's frustration reflects what every fan, analyst, and even former Mavericks legends are feeling. You don't trade away Luka Doncic without a legitimate, franchise-altering explanation. But the Big Diesel didn't stop there. In another segment, Shaq turned his focus to Luka himself and how he's handling all the noise.
He has a crazy chip, and I could tell by his professionalism and press conference. Like, they're asking him questions like, what do you think about Dallas management? And he stops and he laughs. Oh, he's pissed off. And you made a great point. You're with a guy that's 41 years old and knows how to take care of his body. You're going to get to see what he does. And maybe he's going to be like, hey, man, people calling you fat. Let's try this for a week. Let's do this. Like, LeBron, what do you eat? How do you do this? How do you do that? And LeBron, like you said, they're going to be trading secrets. And
that's where this trade gets interesting. Shaq sees something brewing, something that should terrify the rest of the league. Luka isn't just moving to another team. He's stepping into an environment built for greatness. For years, critics have taken shots at Luka's conditioning. Is he in shape? Does he take care of his body the way other superstars do? Well, guess what? Now he's playing alongside the ultimate blueprint. LeBron James, at 41 years old, is still playing at an elite level, largely because of his legendary discipline, diet, and training methods. If Luka absorbs even half of what LeBron does to maintain his body, it's game over. Because if Luka combines his raw talent with elite conditioning, that's unstoppable. That's MVP dominance. That's Dallas's worst nightmare. So, while the Mavericks still can't explain why they traded Luka, Shaq sees the real story unfolding. They didn't just trade Luka, they gave him the ultimate motivation to become even greater. And when Luka comes back stronger, sharper, and more dominant than ever, Shaq, like the rest of us, will be waiting for Dallas's explanation. When a superstar gets traded, especially in a move as shocking as this one, there's usually a fallout. Players lash out. They take shots at their former team. They air grievances, fire off cryptic social media posts, and make sure the world knows they weren't the problem. But Luka Doncic, he did none of that. And that's exactly why Josh Hart had to give him his flowers. In a recent interview, Hart praised Luka's composure in the wake of the trade, pointing out how easy it would have been for him to fire back at all the noise.
One, I'll say Luka's classy as hell, because he got traded, and then like all like, you know, the little like reports or whatever, like, oh, he's 270, or they were scared or like worried about Supermax, all these like rumor reports, and he never addressed it. He just like took the high road, didn't say nothing. So I'm like, dang. I don't know if I could do that.
That's real respect coming from a fellow NBA player. Because let's be honest, the Mavericks didn't just trade Luka, they let the media tear him apart on the way out. Reports questioning his weight, his leadership, his commitment, all the things teams usually say about problem players. And yet, Luka never fired back. No bitter press conferences, no interviews where he aired out Dallas's dirty laundry. He let his game do the talking. And for guys like Hart, that speaks volumes. Because in a league where players are constantly scrutinized, taking the high road isn't easy. But Luka, he never let them see him sweat. And that might be why the people who've actually played alongside him, the ones who know what it takes to succeed, continue to defend him. Just ask Morris. If there's one narrative that just won't die, it's the idea that Luka Doncic isn't in shape. Critics love to talk about his conditioning, his body type, his defense, as if he's some guy struggling to keep up in the league. But here's the thing. Luka is putting up 30-point triple-doubles in his sleep. And Morris, who actually played with Luka, wants people to stop pretending like that's normal. In a recent interview, Morris shut down the ridiculous idea that Luka's conditioning was a problem.
He's a great guy, man. Super low maintenance, don't need much. One of the only guys that I've been on the team with that will play through any injury if he can get on the court. I hear stuff about him not being in shape, but if you could go on an NBA game and get 30, 15, and 10 like it's nothing, then I don't really know what shape is.
Morris just said what needed to be said, because when has conditioning ever stopped Luka from dominating? He plays through injuries. He controls the game at his own pace. He consistently puts up video game numbers. So, if that's what being out of shape looks like, what exactly are we talking about here? Morris, like many others, sees the bigger picture, the idea that the Mavericks used Luka's conditioning as a weak excuse for why they moved him. But his former teammates aren't letting that slide. Because if Luka can drop 40 while supposedly not being in shape, what happens if he actually leans into the same level of body maintenance as, say, LeBron James? That's the scary part. And if this trade ends up being the motivation Luka needs to hit another level, then Dallas didn't just trade away a superstar. They might have created an even bigger monster. If there's one person who knows exactly what Luka Doncic has been through, it's Sasha Doncic, his father, his mentor, and the man who's watched his son carry teams on his back since he was a teenager. So when criticism started swirling about Luka's fitness and effort after the trade, Doncic Sr. wasn't about to stay quiet. In a passionate interview, he shut down every excuse the Mavericks tried to use to justify their decision.
Spet pravim, en posameznik rekel, da ni dobro pripravljen, da je lani odigral, ne vem, to ti bolj veš 100 tekem, praktično 40 minut, da je imel skozi po 2-3 igralca na sebi, da greš ti take stvari govoriti, to se mi zdi pa zelo nekorektno od strani posameznika. Tradal si ga, stoj za svojim tradom, ne pa iskati svojih izgovorov ali pa alibijev.
And there it is. Sasha is calling out Dallas directly, saying what every Luka supporter has been thinking. Because at some point, the Mavericks had to own up to what they did. They didn't just trade away a superstar, they traded away their entire identity. And instead of just saying, we made a decision and we'll live with it, they tried to rewrite history, painting Luka as difficult, unfit, or not the right leader for their future. But as Sasha pointed out, how do you say Luka isn't in shape when he's out there playing nearly 40 minutes a night, getting double and triple teamed every game? You don't, unless you're looking for an excuse. And for Luka's father, the most disrespectful part of this whole situation isn't even the trade itself. It's the weak justification that followed. Dallas made their choice, and now they have to live with it. Because if Luka takes this as fuel, if he reaches another level in LA and makes the Mavericks regret everything, they're not going to be able to spin the story anymore. The world is going to see it for what it really is. This wasn't just another blockbuster trade. This wasn't just a bold front office decision. This was a seismic shift in NBA history. Luka Doncic, the face of the Dallas Mavericks, the player who was supposed to be their next Dirk Nowitzki, was sent away. And the reactions? They tell the whole story. Former players called it one of the worst front office moves ever. Analysts demanded real answers from the Mavericks. Current NBA stars defended Luka against every baseless excuse. And yet, even after all the backlash, Dallas still hasn't truly explained why. Was it ego? Was it power struggles? Was it business? We may never know the full truth, but here's what we do know. Luka Doncic isn't going away. He's not some fallen star that got exposed. He's not washed, lazy, or difficult to work with. He's one of the most dominant young players in NBA history. And now, he's motivated. If there's one thing sports has taught us, it's that the greatest players never forget. Michael Jordan had his "I took that personally" moments. Kobe Bryant had the Mamba mentality, turning every slight into fuel. LeBron James rewrote his legacy after The Decision. And Luka? We're about to witness his version of that story. This trade isn't the end of Luka Doncic's greatness. It's the beginning of his revenge tour. And the Mavericks, they just handed him every reason to make sure the NBA never forgets their mistake. The debate will rage on for years. Was this the right move? Did the Mavericks just throw away a dynasty? Will Luka take his game to a level we've never seen before? Only time will tell. But one thing is for sure, this trade will never be forgotten, and neither will Luka Doncic.